Congressman, of course, you're also co-chair of the Congressional Study Group on Korea, and you were in Seoul just recently talking to leaders and experts there. What's the reaction going to be on President Trump just suspending military exercises with South Korea? Will that affect the alliance?
Well, first, Sherry, David, thank you for having me on. I do think it's premature for us to be talking about suspending military exercises with our close friends and allies in South Korea. And, it's a first step, but your prior guest laid out the complexity of, how we get from here to denuclearization. So the president may have been a little bit premature in saying we're going to stop doing our exercises, maybe a bit premature about even talking about withdrawal of U.S. troops. We've got lots of interest in the region, and we can't show any space between us and our friends and the South Korean allies.
So, Congressman, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to admit it right up front. Is it helpful for Mr. Schumer, the majority leader, to be coming out and calling it a reality show? Someone, I mean, it's not even 24 hours old. We don't really know whether this is going to amount to something really substantial. And don't we root for some peace over there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would tone down the rhetoric. I might not agree with everything that the president said, but at least we're talking. It feels better than when I was in South Korea a year ago, when it really did feel like we were a lot closer to a potential kinetic conflict. At least we're talking. This is going to be a long, slow process. I think we ought to let the Secretary of State, working with Congress, start to work out the details of what these next steps are. And, rhetoric back and forth from Democrats or Republicans isn't necessarily helpful. Let's hope diplomacy works, but let's verify and be cautious.
It will be a long process that will play out during the midterm elections as well. Will this affect the U.S. election climate? I mean, peace and prosperity are really good topics for the GOP to run on.
Peace and prosperity are topics that all of us want as Americans. I don't think, President Trump's dialogue with Kim Jong Un is going to be a huge factor in the midterm elections. I think those elections are going to be a referendum a little bit on where President Trump is, but it's going to come down to the candidates and the campaigns that they're running. And I think on the Democratic side, we've got some really good candidates that are running really strong campaigns. I think from our end, my message to the administration is they ought to work really closely with Congress. This is going to be a very tough negotiation. We have to stand strong. We shouldn't be thinking about relaxing any of the sanctions at this juncture. I think China was wrong by saying, go to the UN Security Council and start to think about rolling back some of the sanctions. We've got a long ways to go here, and the president would be best served by working closely with Congress in a bipartisan way.
Well, and not only did China have that foreign ministry statement, but also the president himself in the news conference said that China had been good on closing the border, except for the last couple of months when they started backing off. Is there anything Congress can do to essentially keep China on side during what we all agree is a long process?
We've already passed pretty sweeping sanctions and given the administration the ability to do secondary sanctions on Chinese banks, et cetera. Part of what got Kim Jong Un to the table was how biting those sanctions were, how his cash reserves were actually starting to dry up, and some of the ruling elite in North Korea were starting to feel the pain here. Now's not the time to take our foot off the pedal here. We've got to continue to stay strong and make sure Chinese banks don't start sending capital to North Korea. We've got a good leverage on negotiations right now. Let's keep moving forward, and let's keep actually laying out what denuclearization would look like. What are those concrete steps? And now's not the time for China or the UN Security Council to be even thinking about reducing sanctions.
President Trump even saying that he absolutely plans to invite the North Korean leader to the White House. How wise would that be?
I think that's probably not the right next step. The right next step is let's let Secretary Pompeo and other members of the cabinet sit down, Secretary Mattis, start thinking about what this actually looks like. Maybe eventually you can get to a place where the North Korean leader can visit Washington, D.C. But right now, we've got a long ways to go. And I think those of us in Congress want to see some concrete steps towards denuclearization.